Excellent. As Michelle indicated, I'm Ann Mintier. I'm a 2019 graduate from the Docent training program. And I want to thank Michelle for inviting me today to give you an overview of Japanese art and culture. I enjoyed Michelle's overview of China, and it gave me a lot of insights on how to put this program together for you all this morning. And as she said, when she did the China overview, it can be a little bit daunting to compress thousands of years of art and history and culture into one lecture. And there's definitely going to be events that I'm going to leave out this morning. So just think of this as really level setting and looking at Japan at about a 30,000 foot perspective. Also, each of you comes into this program, I know, with very differing knowledge about Japan. Some of you have been there as visitors or have done a lot of in-depth research, have maybe participated in some programs with the Asian Arts Council, and others, this may be all new material that maybe you didn't study that much in your formal education. So hopefully today I can give everyone some general background that will enhance your overall study. I was actually just in New York. I had a chance to meet my first grandchild, and as part of that trip, I spent some time in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And if you've ever been there, you will know that they have just a tremendous Japanese collection. It's just amazing. And I was putting together this talk, and so much of what I saw really inspired me. And so you'll notice that some of the examples this morning come from the Met's collection. And I'm going to take any questions or comments you have. Why don't we hold them till the end of the session? And I really would welcome any comments, anything additional that you know, information you have that you think would be useful for the group. I would welcome. We'll just have the discussion at the end of the presentation. Okay, let's get started. Japan is an island nation, and it's off the coast of mainland Asia. And it's a really interesting location given its proximity to the Asian mainland and its neighbors, particularly China and the Koreas. And that location, of course, means that in some ways it has been influenced by the mainland as well as other societies to the west. And then being an island, Japan has at times in its history also been an extremely isolated country as well. And that's given it the opportunity to formulate what I would call real intrinsically Japanese culture, etc. So I'm going to try to highlight the areas where there have been influences and where Japan has developed an intrinsically Japanese sense of art and culture. So I'll give you a sense of this history in a really brief, as I said, truncated way. And I want to try to connect that history to the country's artistic traditions. Now, we know that the islands have been inhabited since prehistoric times. And we're going to touch on each historical period from the early civilizations, really, really ancient, all the way up to what's known as the Meiji period, and that ends in 1912. So the first notable civilization to emerge in Japan was during the Jomon period. And then this was essentially a hunter-gatherer society. And this era is named after the cord markings that decorated the surfaces of the pottery that was made during this time. I think that the Jomon period pottery is just tremendous. It really illustrates the remarkable skill and aesthetic sense of the people who produced it. It's just fantastic. And they built vessels like the one that you see here, essentially from the bottom up, using coils of wet clay that were mixed with materials like mica and crushed shells. And the pots were decorated in this very interesting way with geometric patterns. And then they were left to dry completely before they were fired at very low temperatures in an outdoor fire pit. Take a close look at this Jomon period mark bowl and notice how you see those sort of vertical and swirling ridges that ornament the exterior sides of the pot. And you can see that the potter added these real interesting sawtooth mouth rim that goes around the main cylinder. There aren't any written records of the ancient Jomon people. And so the reason why the potters sculpted these dynamic rims still remains a mystery, but I've actually never seen anything like it. I think it's really quite unique, and especially when you look at the time frame, really, really beautiful. Also very unique to the Jomon period were clay figurines, as you see here. And these are figures that are known as doju. And they typically represent female figures that have very exaggerated features. So you see kind of very wide eyes, narrow waist, protruding hips, and these very interesting, mysterious markings on the bodies. Some archaeologists believe they may have been used in spiritual rituals, perhaps as images of goddesses, but we don't know for sure. The next era is known as the Yayoi period. And this is a time when we begin to see some contact with the Asian mainland. Certain ideas, technologies that are coming over directly from China and Korea. And in fact, we know that by 100 BCE, there's actually direct, consistent contact with the Han Dynasty in China. We know that in Japan, there was cultivation of rice by this time. There were production of metal tools and the very beginning stages of a hierarchical social structure. And you can see, think about that first pot that we looked at from the Jomon period and compare it with this pot that you see here. You can tell that Yayoi period ceramics are stylistically just extremely different from the cord mark Jomon ceramics. And the style, as you can see, has much cleaner surfaces and shapes, including very, very smooth walls. The sturdy constructions that suggest by this time there's this interest in symmetry, and that actually is very very characteristic of pots from the Yayoi period. Shinto is a religion that originated in Japan during the Yayoi period. And it developed kind of interestingly in conjunction with agriculture. So it really focused on the needs of a farming society and a lot of the rites that are around planting and harvesting. You'd have villagers that would pray to spirits called kami. And the Japanese believed that kami existed in mountains and trees and waterfalls and other features of nature. So I know you've had a whole lecture on Shinto, and you'll probably remember that some of the primary characteristics are purification, ritual renewal, this context of sacred space. I was doing some research, and it's amazing how significant the concept of purity was. In fact, it was so critical that I was reading that people would actually abandon buildings and settlements in this period if they had negative events, for example, a poor harvest, devastating weather, anything that in their mind suggested spiritual corruption. And you can see in the photo, these sorts of torii gateways would mark the entrances of Shinto shrines. The third stage in Japanese prehistory is known as the Kofun period. And so by 300 CE, Japan has really now become a centralized empire under a monarch, and it enters this really long period of centralization along with governance by an imperial court. This time is really, really notable for its tomb culture. So you had these tomb mounds that were built for the ruling class. And in addition, you had these cylindrical clay sculptures called haniwa that were erected outside of the tombs for protection. The largest of these tombs is just fantastic. It was erected for Emperor Nintoku, and it's surrounded by this huge moat that you see here on the left. And these tombs could be absolutely just enormous. In fact, this one is nearly 5 football fields long, and most of them were keyhole shaped, as you see here. So the landforms were originally cleared except for the haniwa that populated their tops, and they were right above the tomb's burial chambers. So the image at right will give you a sense of what they look like. So populated by the haniwa, and I think populated is a really good word because on some of the largest of these tombs, they have found literally 10 and 20,000 haniwa accompanying, in a circle around the outside, essentially kind of guarding or for various rituals around the tomb culture. So as I mentioned, haniwa are these clay objects. So sometimes they were cylinders, and then as things evolved later in their development, they became more figures and animals. And you also want to think of these as clay that's been low fired, unglazed, and this gives it that characteristic reddish color that you see here in the slide. And by low fire, I mean it's fired at a low temperature. So we're not really talking about a very complicated technology to harden this clay. And I mean, think about it, if you have 10 or 20,000 of these to make, when somebody dies, you probably got to do it pretty quickly. Although I imagine, just like in many cultures, a ruler would often make arrangements for the funerary objects or their tomb, even when they were alive. So many may have not been made at the last minute, but this practice is clearly just for the rulers and the elites. And it's also interesting to understand the evolution of haniwa. The simplest and earlier forms are those simple cylinders that you see. And then as they developed into animals and then finally figures, what I find just fascinating is that the figures, the animals are of such a remarkable variety. So there's this sense of agriculture, of farming, and there are women. In fact, there are one lovely female figure that you can see here on the right. She is just beautifully dressed with a necklace and a bracelet. And if you look closely at her garment, you can see that it's incised. So many of the haniwa are really quite elaborate. So let's look at one that is what I think one of the most elaborate. This is a large warrior haniwa. And the word elaborate is a really good one for describing the clothing. So let's take a look at it. The faces and the bodies in a haniwa can be quite simplified. And it suggests to me that really it's the clothing that represented their station in life, and that was what was important. So it wasn't important who they were individually, but rather the part that they would play in the afterlife of the ruler. So this particular figure, I think, looks like he'd do a pretty good job guarding a tomb. And he's armed, as you can see, with a sword, and he's completely covered in a Japanese armor. It's a style that's known as keiko. And these are actually plates of armor that hang down.
Get your stuff?
I did.
So I love the photograph and really highlighting this because it gives you the ability to see how the details around how the armor was actually made. You can even see that he's wearing a wrist guard on his left arm to protect him from the string of the bow after he unleashes the arrow. Because think about, if you know anything about archery, when the bowstring is let go of and springs back, and it can actually hit the arm and really hurt. And you can even see how the armor here is constructed. So you can see the plates, look up at his helmet. The plates are joined together with metal rivets, and these are represented by those little small buttons of clay on the Haniwa helmet. So we're talking about iron plates that have either been fastened together by rivets, or in other cases, and you can see kind of lower down, probably tied together with leather. So there's just, again, a tremendous amount of specificity. And then look at the sheath that holds the sword, and the figure at top right, you can see that it's tied with a string that wraps around the back of the warrior's waist. And you can even see that bow on the right hip. Just really amazing. I love the way the flaps come down from the helmet and protect the sides of his face. Kind of frame that face and create a shadow, kind of a dimensionality that's actually a little bit rare in Haniwa, which tend to be quite flat and, as I mentioned, cylindrical. In fact, the word Haniwa means clay cylinder, and we know that the earliest Haniwa were these simple cylinders, but even as they develop, look at the other three to the right, you can see that even as they're developing into human figures, so much of the form itself remains cylindrical. So often arms are simple cylinders, legs are simple cylinders, but they're so expressive nonetheless, right? I mean, what's fascinating to me anyway is that you've got this combination of realism along with abstraction. So we talked about the level of detail in the armor, but in other areas, when we look at the bodies of the Haniwa, the arms are too short or the legs are too long. They're just not realistic at all. So as I mentioned, the emphasis seems to be on this expressiveness, as well as their role in the afterlife of the ruler or the elite. Just terrific objects from the Kofun period, so the tomb period when these were made in Japan. Also during this time, the potter's wheel was used for the very first time in Japan. And we think it was likely brought in from Korea, where it had been adopted from China. And it was used to produce what we call sewware. Typically, these are bluish gray vessels, and they were fired at higher temperatures than what we've seen previously. And like other types of ancient Japanese pottery, sewware continues even to this day to be a source of inspiration for ceramicists in Japan. During the Asuka period, this was an incredibly important time because we see the moment when Buddhism was introduced into Japan. And this was an import from India by way of mainland China and Korea. And the Japanese imperial court really got behind this, and they embarked on major Buddhist commissions during this time. So I know you're going to have a whole lecture on Japanese Buddhism, so I'm not going to do a deep dive into this topic today, but you'll probably remember from prior lectures that according to Buddhist thought, life is marked by suffering, and only by attaining enlightenment like the Buddha can we escape this endless cycle of suffering, death, and rebirth. Another interesting fact is that Japan's Prince Shotoku is celebrated as one of Japan's early champions of Buddhism. And you see him here represented in art. And after his death, he was actually worshipped by the Japanese as an incarnation of the actual historical Buddha. So this era is actually quite different from the prehistoric periods that we've talked about so far because of the introduction of writing to Japan via Korea and via China. And with written language also came things like standardized measuring systems, currency, the practice of recording current events. So now think about the evolution of Japan. It's really evolved at this point into a centralized bureaucratic government, very heavily modeled on the Chinese, and it enters this very long period of governance by a strong imperial court. During the Nara period, China's Tang dynasty had a very major impact on Japan. And the imperial government built a number of quite significant Buddhist temple complexes that very closely followed Chinese models. So let's take a look at a Japanese temple, and this is known as the Great Buddha Hall of Todaiji. And it was built in the 8th century. And to me, the temple is really evidence of Japan's cosmopolitanism at the time, because what we see here is really a building that owes an enormous debt to Chinese architecture of about the same period. And then fun fact, the temple has the largest bronze statue of a Buddha. So it's a really important place for the development of Japanese Buddhism, which has at this time widespread popularity in Japan. In the Heian period, the capital moves to what is now modern-day Kyoto. And this period, tremendously significant, primarily because it represents Japan's golden age, just a real high point in Japanese culture. So what's interesting to me is that you had this incredible confluence of political stability and the development of just a fabulous artistic and literary culture. And this would have a very lasting influence on Japanese art. Another very significant thing to know about this time is you had a period of really rich blending of the religion of Buddhism with Shintoism. And when we think of Buddhism in Japan, to me, it's important to talk about Fudo-myo, a Buddhist deity, and he was just totally revered in Japan. I'm a little bit stubborn by nature, and this figure really appeals to me because he is Fudo, the immovable one. And you want to think of him kind of as like a guardian. He's like the bouncer of Buddhism. He's there to protect Buddhist law and the followers of Buddhism. And the first sculptures of Fudo were made in Japan, and they were seated, as you see here. Later, he was portrayed standing and in other postures, but this is a very early representation of Fudo. So what people would do is they would inscribe wishes to Fudo, which monks would then burn at his altar. And so as the smoke would rise up, and you would have this, rather elaborate fire burning ritual, the hope would be that Fudo would provide protection as the bad luck and the obstacles are removed from the earth. And so he's an important figure, and you should know that many, many images of Fudo have been reproduced in Japanese art. He's also recognizable by his really kind of frightening form, and then the two symbols that you see in the image. So the sword in his right hand is symbolic, and it's meant to give him the ability to sort of cut through ignorance and delusion. And then can you see that there's a rope or a lasso in his left hand? And this is an ability to rein in what was perceived as violent passions or evil, or really any obstacle that could block our paths to enlightenment. And you can see he's surrounded by purifying flames, which also basically consume evil in the world. During the Heian period, there was a very significant style known as Yamato-e, and it's a time when this style was born. And it's a term that's really meant to understand something that is intrinsically Japanese versus Chinese. It refers to specific formats, for example, like a folding screen, as you see here, and specific choices of subject matter. So typically landscapes is what we see, as well as illustrations of Japanese poetry, history, folklore. So you're seeing here one of the earliest examples of Heian Yamato-e, landscape painting in the work that's pictured. And it's a 6-fold screen from the 11th century. I really wish I could have gotten a sharp, clear close-up image, but hopefully you can see this is a painting. There's some images of mountains and water. This work has actually been designated as a national treasure in Japan. And it's just so beautiful. And as I said, very kind of emblematic of this concept of intrinsic Japanese works of art. Another favorite subject in the late Heian period was the tale of Genji. And it was written in the early 11th century, and it was attributed to a lady in waiting at the imperial court, Lady Murasaki. And it's a really, very interesting, complex novel that focuses on romantic interests and entanglements of Prince Genji and then his total royal entourage. And the novel, to me, and in fact, so much of Japanese literature display a really tremendous sensitivity towards what I would say is the transience of love and of life. That's a very common theme that you do see in Japanese art and Japanese literature. So as you see here, we have an early illustration of the tale, and this is in a hand scroll format. And it exemplifies sort of what I was describing as a mode of narrative painting. So you see illustrations, and then at the bottom right, lower right, you can see a passage of text. So take a close look at it. It's ink and colors on paper. And what I find really interesting is, do you notice how there are these flat color fields that really give you a sense of two-dimensionality with the work? And then at the same time, you've got sort of an upturned ground, and you have these diagonal lines that give you a sense of three-dimensionality, three-dimensional space. Next is a period of real upheaval in Japanese history. It's a time that's known as the Kamakura period. And it's significant in the sense that the capital city of Kyoto, as I mentioned, is where the emperor resided. And around him were a number of aristocrats. And they started to fight amongst themselves. They began challenging the emperor's authority, and they farmed out those disputes to mercenaries. And sometimes these mercenaries were from, real distant branches of their families. And these mercenary warriors actually took over the court itself. So the mercenary soldiers are known as the samurai, and they were these roving warriors. In some cases, they were protecting smaller communities, but in many cases, they were ravaging and pillaging these communities. And they eventually established themselves as a shogunate. And the most famous of these is the Kamakura shogunate. So what we have here, and what's significant for you all to know, is that we have a power shift from what's now a largely symbolic emperor that's in Kyoto, and power is shifting to the Kamakura shogunate. And these individuals, significantly for us, are also becoming the leading patrons of art and of architecture. That sort of comes with this power shift. And at this time, something very interesting in art history to me is that you've got sculptures of very realistic, almost what I would call portrait statues that are all done in wood. So imagine you're on the second floor of the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Japanese galleries, and you're looking at what is, really almost a life-size carving of a wooden figure of Jizo, who is a bodhisattva. And a bodhisattva is a deity that attends to a Buddha being the primary focus of Buddhist sects. So every Buddha has his own specific bodhisattvas, and Jizo attends to the Buddha Amitabha, the Buddha of compassion. So remember that a Buddha is an enlightened being, but he's not chosen to remove himself entirely from our world. So the bodhisattvas, they remain here so they can help us and kind of function as a ladder to lead us to this higher realm, which is enlightenment. So considering the role of the bodhisattva, now look at Jizo. I mean, to me, he does seem to be very formal and almost a little bit aloof. So the reason he looks this way is because he is in a state of meditation. And it's the assurance of the garments and what he's carrying, actually, his staff, his jewel that you see, that's what conveys to followers the message of compassion. So although he is earthly, he represents to us, followers of Buddhism, access to the divine. And think about this, we're looking at a sculpture that is over 900 years old, and it is in just spectacularly good condition. But remember, we are seeing Jizo out of his original context. So remember, he would have been in a temple and probably surrounded with some beautiful flowers, would have probably been by himself, because although Jizo is a bodhisattva, not a Buddha, he's also an extremely important figure of devotion in his own right in Japan. So entire schools of worship arose around this particular figure in Japan. And the way in which you can recognize Jizo is because of what he's holding. So notice the monk's staff, and then the jewel in his left hand, and then his bald head. This references him as a monk, and particularly those extended earlobes. So the lobe is extended, and there's that really long slot that you see that suggests once that in an earlier form, he was wearing these very, very heavy earrings. So he's traded his glittery worldly earrings for a simplified spiritual garments of a monk. And notice that he's standing on a pedestal, and that's actually a representation of a gigantic lotus blossom. And the reference there is to this just exquisite flower that begins its life in the mud. And this seems to me to also be a kind of message that through humble bearing, one can spiritually blossom. You can also see some other elements of that in his staff, which is a monk's staff. A monk, remember, who's given up all his worldly possessions, and he is actually dependent on the good will of others. So these are mendicant monks, and they would wander through the rural areas. When they came to villages, they would bang their staff, get the attention of the villagers. And you can see it has several rings at the top that dangle. And so when you bang the staff, the rings would rattle. Notice on the image on the right, I think you can make it out, there's an image that has his urna, which is in his forehead. And it's just above the eyes. It's a symbol of wisdom. So really the ability to see beyond the ordinary world, seeing into the spiritual realm. He's holding an object that actually looks a bit to me like an onion, and it sits on a small lotus blossom itself. And this is the wish granting jewel, and it's one of the central symbols of Jizo. So the hand that holds the jewel, I don't know if you can see it really well, but it's just beautifully carved. And if you get a chance to see it in person, and remember that the position of the hands are known as mudras, which means symbolic gestures. So a mudra is a term that is applied to the hand positions of many deities that are coming out of the traditions of India, as Jizo ultimately does. So every feature of this work is intended to convey some sort of meaning. So remember that I mentioned that Kamakura period was really a time of tremendous upheaval in Japan with the rise of the samurai. And this figure seems like so serene. There's no reference it displays, at least to me, of just this incredible political chaos and the violence that was unfolding really around this serene figure. So it makes you really think of the temple, the Buddhist temple, as a place of real refuge during this time in Japan. So Japanese art is really also revelatory about its society, its culture, the significant events that happened in the society. And I do like this image to display that concept. You can see that it's a large painting, and it's done in pen and ink and pigments. And it's on a paper scroll. It's from the 13th century. And this event that's depicted took place about 100 years earlier. And it shows us the rise of the samurai class. So this class of warriors, as I mentioned, that came from the countryside, and they had some real conflict with the central court, and they had some real conflict with each other. So here we see the conflict between basically two clans, and the rebels are attacking each other, and they're attacking the Sanjo Palace. And they're actually kidnapping the emperor, Go Shirakawa. So you see in the image, they breach the palace, they burn the palace, and the work uses these images to actually record the battle. And you can see how vividly, how naturalistically the events here are depicted. By the 14th century, we have the Muromachi period. And what's happening historically is the rise of local feudal warlords, the daimyos. And the most famous one of these is the Muromachi daimyo. So it gets a little confusing with samurai and daimyo. The daimyos are subordinate to the shogun, and they are also competing with one another for power, basically from the 14th and into the 16th century. So as you can imagine, it's continuing to be a very turbulent, a very violent time in Japanese history. And the works that I pictured are a type of Japanese lacquerware, and it's known as negoro. And this name comes from the Buddhist temple of Nigoroji, and it's located in the mountains that are south of Osaka. And they actually really thrived during the Muromachi period. So you had Buddhist temple life and rituals that were very simplified, very restrained, very much, in my opinion, like this lacquerware. And these are very sort of high quality Nigoro lacquers, and they were really prized for temple use. So you had workshops that were in the vicinity of Nigoroji and some other cultural centers of Japan who were producing them in pretty prodigious amounts. The color red was considered auspicious and durable, and Nigoro ware also fit really well with the aesthetic taste of tea practitioners who appreciated these qualities of wabi, which is beauty found in imperfection, and sabi, the effects of wear and age. So as you can see in these works, over time, that outer red coating of lacquer becomes worn away, and you can begin to reveal the black lacquer beneath. All right, now imagine we've made our way up a steep hillside and we're outside of the north end of Kyoto. And we've entered this Buddhist temple complex of Rionji. And the temple was built in about 1480, but we're not going to actually focus on the temple itself, but on its very unique rock garden. So it's interesting, when you enter the temple, you're asked to take off your shoes. You're in a very spiritual space, but you're also in a space where tourists are making their way through. So the complex consists of many temples and shrines and places of meditation for the monks who lived here. But this is a place that is specifically related to Zen Buddhism. And the most famous place within is the rock garden. So you can see the garden as kind of a distillation of the ideas of Zen Buddhism and of this highly, highly refined sense of Japanese aesthetics. It is really just such a beautiful and refined space. So we see the enclosed courtyard, and it's filled with light gray stones. And there's a series of moss islands from which the rocks are protruding. So when we think of a garden, we tend to think of flowers, right? Or maybe a water feature, but in a Zen garden, it is specifically designed to encourage meditation. And in fact, the word Zen means meditation. So again, the central idea around Buddhism is to transcend suffering and cultivate oneself and reach enlightenment. And in Zen Buddhism, the path is sudden enlightenment that comes through meditation. Also, nature is looked at very, very carefully. So its innate qualities, its imperfection, its inherent forms. The idea is not to erase nature and make it something that's perfect. It's really an idea about understanding nature, to examine something and really understand its qualities. So sabi, finding beauty in what is worn and what is aged. So what we have here and what is interesting to art historians is this particular garden, as I mentioned, and it's an example of Kari Sansui garden, which essentially means dry landscape rock garden. It's a compound, and you can see there's this enclosed courtyard. The stones and the rocks are in groupings, and you can see the gravel that actually is raked on a daily basis. And this place really shows us the importance of meditation and the importance of reflection in a natural context in Zen Buddhism. The other really important point is that nature is absolutely central to the Japanese way of life. So remember, the Japanese Shinto religion believes everything, even inanimate objects such as rocks, have spirit. And you're invited to sort of enter this place and contemplate those forces in nature and reflect and meditate on our relationship to the natural world when you come into a space like this. So the idea, as I said, of relationship to nature is a very central theme in Japanese art. And then I'll get off this rock garden, I promise, but just look around the edges of the garden at the enclosure, and you see that wall hasn't been recently painted. It's really worn. You've got the pebbles raked in deliberate patterns, and you're really emphasizing that horizontal, slowing your eye down. And then I love the shot at the right where you can actually see sort of oval shapes that frame each of the individual rock islands, almost like waves of the sea. It's really a garden meant to incite enlightenment that could come at any moment. So just really, really unique. All right, so now we are back on the second floor of the Metropolitan Art Museum, and we're looking at a folding screen, which is just fantastic. It's about 5.5 feet long, or tall, 5.5 feet tall, and it dates back to the early 16th century. And this is a wonderful example of a folding screen from the Muromachi period. The screen itself presents sort of a combination of both Chinese and Japanese elements. So the subject of bamboo tends to be seen as inherently Chinese, but the idea of naturalism, of 4 seasons, of the passage of time, these tend to be seen in both art and in literature as inherently Japanese. So as we can see it, you want to look from right to left, so keep that in mind. Also, the entire screen would have been much more vivid when it was made. So, given its age and the passage of time and storage, et cetera, much of that gold leaf that would have pervaded the entire background has largely faded now. But we can see how you actually move through the new year. So again, starting at far right, look to the base and those little small violets that represent spring, and then moving to your left, we're in summer. And that symbolizes by those little bamboo shoots that continue from the middle screen to the left. And passage of time. And then again, starting at right, we proceed to autumn. And autumn in the center of the screen is marked by, it's a little bit hard to make out, but it's a presence of a type of ivy that's climbing up the bamboo branches. So that would have been brighter red originally. And the white that we're seeing there in the middle is actually the underpainting. And then from the ivy, we transition going left from autumn to winter at the end of the painting, and those beautiful, delicate, snow-capped bamboo. I love how you have the autumn bamboo that is just almost touching the bamboo that's weighted down by snow. And again, it's just, to me, this is really emblematic of this wonderful sort of elegant relationship between the seasons that allows our eyes to sort of, naturally jump from one season to the next. So the change of seasons is illustrated both in Japanese painting and poetry. And remember, it was the transition between the seasons that was especially important. This work commands a very, very prominent position in the Buddhist gallery at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. And I visited the MIA right before the pandemic in 2019, and this work is absolutely fabulous to see in real life. It's by an artist called Kichizan Minchu, and he's one of Japan's most famous, most important painters. He lived and worked in Kyoto, then the capital, and he's active at just an incredibly sort of pivotal point in the development of ink painting in Japan. So in this time frame, we had a large number of Chinese paintings that are just arriving in Japan. And the Japanese collectors are just buying up these Chinese paintings, and Japanese artists are learning how to paint in ink for the first time. So Min Chao was one of those painters, and he had this large stable of followers. And although he was trained in sort of what I would think of as like classically Buddhist paintings, he very quickly picked up the art of Chinese ink painting. And you can see he never, ever gave up his love of gold and the use of gold. So not only Min Chao, but also all of his followers, one of the characteristics of their painting is the very, very prevalent use of gold in basically otherwise an entirely monochromatic image that you can see here. So look how the crown of the Bodhisattva is painted in gold ink. And the rest of the painting, it relies just entirely on ink wash. So on a variety of tones of ink wash. And he leaves the halo and the face and parts of the chest almost entirely blank. It's actually bare paper when you go in and see it in person. It's incredible. And then notice how just in this economy of brushwork, he describes the entire body with these wonderful contour lines that you see on the robes. And then using what must have, to me, been just the very finest brush he could find. You see those little wisps of hair around the figure's head. I just love this work. All right, so a time of instability and then ultimately civil war leads us into the Momoyama period. And this era is very short. And yes, we have continuing conflict between these Japanese warlords. This period tends to be characterized by very, very bold, expressive art. And to me, that sort of mirrors the image of the energy of these very strong military leaders that are essentially dominating the politics and the lives of people in the country. And the Japanese warlords had these huge palatial residences, and they just love to decorate them with these painted folding screens that featured very lavish use of gold leaf. One castle, particularly of note, was adorned with these very highly expressive paintings that are by a painter called Kino. Etoku, who established what I think is kind of a Chinese, Japanese aesthetic. And Kino had a very innovative approach to painting, characterized by, as you can see, very dynamic compositions, sort of bold, expressive brushwork, often a lot of oversized animals and other imagery drawn from nature, but always set against this opulent gold background when you tend to see his works in the warlord residences. Lions at the time were significant, and they were associated with power and bravery. And you can see here how they have these tremendous muscular forms. So in a way you feel, I think, a lot of energy and action, but then notice how you've got the images kind of flattened by those heavy black outlines that are used by the artists. And also think about, you can't appreciate this in a slide, but the scale of this work adds to what would have been the dramatic effect. It's over 7 feet tall and over 15 feet long. So that would really make a splash in your dining room. Also significant at this time, by the 16th century, drinking tea had become very, very popular in Japan. It was first imported actually from China back in the 9th century, and you probably are familiar with the Japanese tea ceremony. That definitely became a very important social ritual. What was important to know about the 16th century is that the first tea houses began being built themselves as independent structures. So that was something that happened in the Momoyama time. All right. So back to the second floor of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, in the galleries that are devoted to the arts of Japan. And here we're looking at a small ceramic bowl. And it's just so unexpected for me. You know, when I think of the ceramics of Japan and Korea and China, I think of these like impossibly thin-walled, beautiful examples of porcelain, just really perfect geometry. So this is anything but, right? And so we're looking at an early 17th century oribe bowl. And you can see it's very irregular in its shape. The rim is undulating. The roundness is distorted in various ways. And we see motifs on the surface as well as inside the bowl. So this is a hard, heavy piece of ceramic, right? If we dropped it on the floor, it would break. But to me, it feels organic. It feels as if it's almost still pliable, as if it were still, almost in the process of being formed. So it preserves the way in which the potters manipulated its material. And so while the bowl was still malleable, the potter would have distorted this perfect shape of a regular round bowl and created the indentations you see that often characterize oribe ware, sort of the willing, active altering of a perfect form. So the shape is significant. It's known as a clog shape, and it really is playfully distorted to resemble those wooden shoes from back in the 12th century. And this is another reference to that aesthetic principle of wabi. Wabi refers to simple, austere, beauty found in imperfection. And, in some ways this is peculiar because this bowl was once perfect, but the notion of wabi, the final bowl, is sort of paradoxically viewed as even more refined than the refined bowl. Does that make sense? It's like the imperfect is more perfect. So the beauty of this bowl to me really derived from, a sort of playfully knowing that. And this paradox would have been especially apparent around the 17th century when the bowl was made, because this would have been seen in stark opposition to those really highly refined objects that you would think of that would have traditionally been used for a tea ceremony. So when objects like these were introduced into the tea ceremony, it was really quite revolutionary. So Oribe ware really shook up Japanese ceramics. The name Oribe is kind of interesting. It comes from Furuta Oribe, and he was both a warlord and a tea master in the late 16th century in Japan. So it may be unexpected that a warlord could also be associated with the tea ceremony, but that was exactly the case here. Inside the bowl, take a look at what we see as a stylized form of a flower, as well as a plum blossom. So the plum blossoms are the 5 dots that are encircling a 6. And the plum blossom is significant because it could specifically denote that idea of the ephemeral, this perfectly beautiful thing that lasts only a moment. So for the user of this bowl, who would have seen these motifs up close, the plum blossoms would have had all of these kind of allusions to classical Japanese poetry. And so in combination with the geometric patterns, that would have created just kind of a very sort of pleasant visual contrast, you know, all for the enjoyment of someone involved in the tea ceremony. So remember that wabi calls to mind something austere, something isolated. And so maybe it's very appropriate that if you visit the Metropolitan Museum of Art, they've actually placed this bowl all by itself on a shelf, just alone, austere, and, you know, really beautiful in its imperfection. The Edo period, the next period, ushers in a very significant time. It was a period, again, of centralization in Japan. And this was actually under the Tokugawa shogunate. So they would rule for over 250 years. And it was a period of relative peace and definitely increased prosperity. So this is an interesting period in Japanese history. You know, on the one hand, we've got political stability under a very strict class-based system, but we also have a period in which foreigners are literally expelled. So it's a period when Japan is closed off to the world. And what's interesting is that during this time, you've got this very vibrant urban culture that develops in the city of Edo, which is modern day Tokyo. So the population of Edo during this period, it includes, you know, significant numbers of merchants, and you've got samurai and their families, and you've got craftsmen, and you've got entertainers. This is one of the most productive eras in Japanese art history in terms of the variety and the sophistication of artistic techniques. And we see the development of popular prints and paintings known collectively as ukiyo-e, literally pictures of the floating world. So these can best be defined as works that were for and about members of the middle class in the Edo period. And this is an example, the one you see here on the screen, of one of the earliest of the masters during this time period. It's a wood block print, ink on paper. And you see his depiction of women, lovers in Edo's pleasure quarters. And he also depicted a lot of scenes from the theater, the kabuki theater. And he actually really influenced subsequent painters and a lot of print designers in Japan. So Japanese art, as I mentioned, is generally known for its allegiance to nature and also its representation of nature in what I would say is almost a poetic fashion. So take a look at the work from the 18th century. And this is a work of art that is on one hand functional and on the other, really an aesthetic object. It's a pair of two-fold screens, color and gold leaf on paper. And it shows us the evolution and the development of Japanese art during the Edo period. So this is a painted screen, a byobu, as the Japanese call it, a folding screen. And it's actually two folding panels side by side to form a four-part folding screen. Wooden for the most part, and it has sort of paper attached to it on the front. And on that paper, we've got gold leaf and we've got pigment. And what we see is a very interesting concept. Again, this is the concept of wabi-sabi, the idea that beauty can be found in the impermanent, in the incomplete, and the imperfect. So it's a natural scene. You can see it's an image of a stream that's flowing in the middle. And you've got those beautiful swirling currents. It's mostly abstract, I think. And then left to right, two naturalistic treatments of two plants. So on the left, you can see a white plum blossom tree. And on the right, a red plum blossom tree. And the stream seems to divide these two, almost if they were really two separate entities. So again, notice the plum trees are not perfect. In fact, they're actually seem to demonstrate that they've been pruned over long periods of time. So if you notice the plum tree on the right, there are areas that have been either pruned or broken off, and then you've got new life that are springing forth from there. And so this in many ways is another representation of wabi-sabi, that nature is imperfect, but there's really great beauty to be found in that imperfection. And that is a dominant theme that we'll also recognize in much of Japan's traditional arts. That is also true in this image. And it's a woodblock print, so it exists in multiple copies. And this is probably one of the best known images from Japanese art. It's in many ways, I think, become like a modern icon and a representative of Japanese art. A few years ago, we were actually deciding at SDMA on one image for our primary museum graphic, and this was one of the finalists. So again, the concept of wabi-sabi you'll see here. Nature, while it's beautiful and it's impressive and majestic, it's also really quite dangerous, quite powerful. And this print is made by the famous Japanese printmaker of the early 19th century, Katsushika Hokusai. And this is his famous Great Wave. I know you're going to be speaking later this month about Japanese woodblock prints. So again, I'm not going to spend lots of time, but Hokusai is worth mentioning in kind of a survey perspective because he was one of the best ukiyo-e masters. He was just remarkably prolific over his long life. So you might be led to believe this is about a wave, but the actual subject here is the view of Mount Fuji in the distance. So you see the number of people in two boats trying to navigate what looks like an extremely rough sea, and this enormous wave. It's almost like a creature that's rising out of the water. It's almost certain to destroy those vessels. And wabi-sabi, again, nature is unruly, it's unpredictable, but there's still very great majesty in it. And there's also nature's duality, I think. On the one hand, you've got that stable landmass in the distance, the mountain, it's eternally there. And that's a very solid feature in Japanese landscape and Japanese psyche. And then on the other hand, you've got this incredible, powerful sea that's like moving like a large monster in the foreground, manifested through that great wave. So this dualism is really held with a lot of intention in the work of art. So finally, I want to touch on the Meiji period. So 1868 was really a watershed year for Japan. After centuries of rule by the shogunates, political power was restored to the emperor. And the American Commodore Matthew Perry led a diplomatic and a military expedition to Japan. The country was open to foreign trade, and all of that self-isolation that had been imposed by the Tokugawa shogunate, it was ended. So trading begins again, and this initiates a period of very rapid industrialization and change. So it's an interesting time. The Japanese are, grappling with the new and the foreign, and they're also participating in things like World's Fairs, and they're, curating samples of Japanese cultural traditions for the outside world to see. Additionally, Japan begins to modernize. So there's rapidly changing social roles for men and women, educational reforms, widespread female literacy. And that transition from the Edo to the Meiji period definitely had challenges. It was not by any measure smooth or seamless. And artists tried really hard to depict this changing way of life, new ideas. This is a very interesting period of Japanese art history to me. So you see almost these competing impulses, modernization on one hand, and then also a focus on the past, a question of like really what now constitutes Japan on the world stage. So take a look at this work. We've got two women and a young girl, and they seem ready for a stroll in the garden behind them. And notice the table kind of in the middle ground at left. You can see there's a European teapot with a matching cup and saucer. And in the background, there's a fountain with kind of a vertical spray, a vertical water spray. And this is a feature that had been recently introduced to Japanese landscape gardening. And this is a silk tapestry that's from the Field Museum. And it is really emblematic of, to me, the Japanese artists, on one hand, becoming very increasingly aware of the foreign. You can definitely see influences from the West in this work. So there's sort of a Western style shading of the trees, and you have a modern division of foreground, background. And yet the figures are flat. And you can see in this work, what's portrayed is an unbroken line of sovereignty, of really a depiction of longstanding Japanese traditions. So this concept of a national mythos becomes extremely important during the Meiji period. Something interesting to note is that Japanese prints begin flowing to the Western world starting in the 18th century. And certainly by the 19th century, after the opening of Japan, a great many prints and other works start to flow and really begin to impact the West in a very direct way. There is a style of art in Western Europe and the US known as Japonisme, basically derived in France originally. And this is a style that delights in Japanese art forms. This is a work, it's really beautiful, by James Whistler, and illustrates this concept of Japanisme. We've got that Japanese folding screen in the background, and then you can see there's a woman who's contemplating some prints from Japan. And it really was an outsider's view of Japan, one that celebrated its textures, its colors, its styles, and the aesthetics of Japan, both in the clothing that you see the woman is wearing, the prints, and the furnishings in the room. And I love this portrait of Zola by Manet. Look up on the shelf, you can see a Japanese print and a Japanese screen that's to his left. And then finally, I wanted to end with this work by American Impressionist Mary Cassatt. And this is an image that owes an enormous debt to Japanese printmaking, with its asymmetry and the strong diagonals, elongated shapes, and you can kind of note that flattened perspective. And so American and European collectors began looking quite carefully at Japanese aesthetics, Japanese design, Japanese themes, and above all, sort of Japanese sense of space and of configuration in their works of art. And that definitely made its way to the Impressionists and the post-Impressionist styles in the late 19th century. So Japan has absolutely had a dramatic and quite significant influence on the arts of the West. Okay, I think I'm, about at time. So thank you. And please, any questions you have, or if there's comments or sort of information that you want to provide to fill in any detail that you think is important, I'd welcome, a discussion.
Thank you, Anne. That was terrific. You covered a lot of ground in that short amount of time. So I know there've got to be questions here. Sandra.
Okay, I have a question and a comment. So I just am a little bit confused about calling Buddhist, the Buddha or the Bodhisattvas deities, and I'm confused about were there gods? Were there no gods? Does deity not necessarily mean a god of some sort, as in Hinduism and so forth? So I just wanted that clarified, possible. And then maybe that could be clarified, and then I'll make my comment, however you want to do that.
The references that I found use the term deity, but I'll defer to Jim or anyone else who's more of an expert in Buddhist thought. I mean, I thought that the term was appropriate in the context of Buddha and a Bodhisattva. But Jim, I don't know if you want to shed any additional light on that.
Yes, we in our training and our docent tours prefer not to use that term. It's a bit imprecise and contentious. So we usually try and find a somewhat similar word like sacred figure or spiritual figure or something like that. It's a very complex question. And so I think to avoid trouble in touring, I think we've sort of taken the collective decision not to use deity for Buddha or the Bodhisattva. Is that fair, Michelle?
Yeah, I agree. That's how we have approached it. And I want to point out too that we have an upcoming lecture from Linda Davis about Japanese Buddhism and putting all of that in perspective too.
Yeah, I mean, in some times and places and some stages of belief in Buddhism, the Buddha has been called a deity or is regarded as a deity, but it isn't universal and it isn't consistent. So you can get into sort of quicksand, I think. You're absolutely right. And there are certain texts and books and so on that do use those terms. But we kind of feel, just to beat a dead horse here, we sort of feel it's probably too problematic and leads to questions or sticky situations where we have to explain things. So it's probably better to avoid that specific word. Don't call the Buddha or the Bodhisattva divinity or deity, but sacred personage, or I don't know what's the term we want to use. Did we ever come up with one, Michelle? Spiritual figure.
Yeah, or because the idea is that they're human who have reached enlightenment, but not necessarily become a god. So yeah, spiritual leader, spiritual helper, something like that.
Thank you. That helps me a lot. But I also have to add, speaking of spiritual, this Japanese art, as you know, I'm bothering you every time with these incredible memories and emotional memories coming up in me from my time there. And Ryoanji Temple, I first saw it I'll probably cry because this is about my father, but in 1988. And my father was a rather cosmically deep spiritual person. And we happened to be there with almost no one else at Ryoanji, which I later found out when I went back some years later was quite unusual because it was just mob the second time I was there. But my father and I got to sit on the steps by that rock garden. Anyway, I'm not going to say anymore. It's just one of my favorite memories. I think it was the first time I could feel what nature felt like when it had been worshipped for thousands of years. It's something we could feel. Anyway, that's it.
Great. Thank you, Sandra. Heather?
Yes, I was just going to offer an alternative to the deity question. I often use exalted being or celestial being, or you could say spiritual being. So it's some kind of a being. It's not a human being and it's not a God being, it's something in between. So I kind of use one of those terms.
Mm-hmm. Enlightened being. Yeah. Something like, yeah. That's a good compromise. Yes, Becky.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. I have two questions. One, could you just talk again on the picture during the UPOE? That was the world. It was a picture of the world floating, the floating picture. I didn't understand how they did that.
So, as I said, the concept is, literally the reference is pictures in a floating world, but they can be a little confusing. I understand that. It took me a little while to kind of put it in perspective. Essentially, as I mentioned, it was the concept is art for and about this very robust, vibrant middle class that's coming into fruition in basically modern day Tokyo during the Edo period. So the image, the wood block print, was an example of one of them. There were a lot of paintings and wood block prints of, say, if you've seen the Kabuki Theater and of the pleasure quarters. But I think even the woodblock print of Mount Fuji by Hokusai is also representative of that concept. So, but literally it's pictures of a floating world. So it's a little confusing. The reference being those subjects, which is landscapes and woodblock prints that depict periods of time, things that were going on in Edo during this period. And so the woodblock print that I gave the example of is an example of that. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah, it's kind of like a big umbrella name for all those.
Exactly. Very, very, you're spot on. Essentially, that a net that captures a number of these different concepts.
Yeah. And then the other one you said we almost bought it. It was the the wave, the Great Wave.
Yes. So
what did we buy and why didn't we buy that?
So, it wasn't really, it was sort of interesting. It was a survey that was done by the museum. And it was sort of, what image will we use with other graphics to sort of represent the San Diego Museum of Art? And I believe they took actually a vote from museum members. And so that Hokusai print that I showed was one of the choices. What I believe the museum actually went with was, if you're familiar with Bouguereau, the young shepherdess. And so, for example, if you go to the SDMA website, and I did this last night because I wanted to, was wondering, like, what did they ultimately go with? That's what it was. And it's kind of a perfect image when you really think about it, because, it's so beloved by docents and by visitors. So, but I wanted to mention it because every time I look at that print of Mount Fuji, I think about it in the context of the museum kind of trying to make a choice.
I think it was for the passes, right? It was for the passes that we give out, the free passes and all that, what image was going to be on there. Yeah.
Right. And I think there's also some other graphics, Michelle, like the website, but you're right. That's where you see it most frequently, I think.
And it's called The Shepherdess?
Yes, it's by Bouguereau, and you will be studying him and his works. And the image is the young shepherdess, and it's just been, we had a big Bouguereau show.
Ellen's got her right there. Yeah. She's
it's
upstairs in the rotunda. Yeah.
Yeah, she's beautiful. So you can, if you want to know what they ultimately decided for the passes and other things, that's what they went with, which I think is a good choice.
Thank you.
Well, and I think I should point out, we do own a copy of that Hokusai print. The Great Wave is its nickname. I don't know if it's in the vaults or if it's in the visible vaults. I don't remember because those are sealed up. I don't recall where it is right now.
Anybody else? Questions, comments? Gosh, you're all quiet today. Okay.
Overwhelmed with the information. It was great.
Yeah, it was a lot of information. So again, we will be putting this on the website and along with the recording. I think David's got us mostly caught up on the recordings. I know I'm still missing Allie's presentation on Korea. It's not up, but that's because she hasn't sent it to me. So as soon as I get it, you will get it. So that's the only reason. I think that's the only one we're missing so far, but we'll get Anne's PowerPoint up there too. So thank you so much, Anne. Really great survey of Japan, and makes it actually adds to my desire to go. It's one place I haven't been and it's on my list.
Yeah, it's funny you said that because I don't know if Pam's still on, but I remember when Pam and I were in training, I was very jealous because she showed me photos of her trip. I think it was to your son, Pam, to visit him in Japan. And actually, we were planning a trip to Japan, but for the pandemic. So I agree with you. I'm going to get there eventually as well. And thanks for, again, inviting me, Michelle, because it's been wonderful to put together. When I go, I'm going to be a lot more educated. And it was fun to refresh a lot of the concepts I had in training and then also do some independent research. So it was a great opportunity. Thanks. And thanks you guys. Good luck with your training.
Good job, Ann.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Hi, Pam. Good to see you. I miss you.
Thanks. I know you're going to get there, but you got to go all kinds of places.
I did.
You got to go.
Yeah, you are right. But you should show them when you get a chance, not to put you on the spot. There's a beautiful photo you showed me. I think it was you and your son, and there were all these, they weren't they were cherry blossoms.
Yeah.
And that was a lovely photo. And I actually was remembering all the talks you and I had when I was putting this together. So anyway, it's great to see you and
Good to see
miss
you.
everybody. So take good care. I'm going to sign off and wish you all the best. And I will see you in the galleries, hopefully very soon.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Okay, everybody, I think we've got, we can take a 15-minute break. Does that work for everybody? And I will start my talk at noon. I don't think it's going to take the full hour. So unless you have lots of questions for me, but so let's take a break. Did anybody do anything fun for Halloween? No. We live in a place where in a normal year, we have hordes and hordes of kids come around, and they come in on buses and all kinds of stuff. And the last Halloween, of course, there was nobody. And this year we just decided we wouldn't give out any, even if there were people, because we just didn't want to do that. But there didn't seem to be very many anyway. So
I had zero, none.
yeah.
Had a bowl of candy, which I'll eat.
Yeah, I've been indulging my addiction to peanut M&Ms.
That's a good thing.
I like the pretzel ones.
Yeah.
My addiction is Reese's peanut butter cups.
Oh yeah. Well, those are
Dark
good.
chocolate.
Milk duds. Okay, I see that, Kathy.
I'm going to have a Reese's after this class.
Okay.
Big one. Dark chocolate.
We had 19 kids.
Oh wow.
A lot.
I know it was actually, yeah, a little more than we had last year, but we decided that since we give out so few, we would just go for the big size, and the kids would be like, Dad, we got like the fun stuff, the big size. They were like, the parents are looking at us like we're crazy. And I'm like, look, it's only 19. It's not that bad.
Dina, do you live in La Mesa?
No, I'm in Claremont.
Claremont. Okay. So you guys have a lot of kids there.
No, we don't. I mean, 19. We really,
Oh, 19. Well, yeah.
we really don't. We don't have any street lights, so people don't come down our street. It looks very dark, and I play all this fun music and hoping that somebody will hear. And
We had 350 kids and we ran out of candy at 7 o'clock.
Wow.
Oh,
Yeah.
Live,
Typically,
We
I gave
bought
out.
a ton of candy. Sort of going by what we had in 2019, we had about 260 kids. So we thought, oh, and it just was like, yeah, it was like once we crossed 300, we were just like, please only take one piece of candy, but we ran out. At 7, we ran out. We just started walking around the neighborhood ourselves.
Yeah.
Where do you live?
And
What area?
Encinitas.
Encinitas. Wow. Wow.
Well,
we
it's
typically-
because on either end of our block, people put up these haunted houses. It's about 7 or 8 houses away on either side. So we're in the middle. So all these kids come back and forth, and the displays are, I don't even know what to say. I mean, they're really getting more amazing every year. But usually we never go to them because, well, we didn't want to go indoors either, but we did everything outdoors. We put the caddy like at a table. We stayed way back. But there were people who had somebody put up a big chute, and they had because they didn't want to come in contact with these unvaccinated kids. So they had candy going down a chute pretty much nonstop. And somebody told me they bought 1,000 pieces of candy, and they'd gone through and went through them all by 8 o'clock. And I was like,
Yeah.
I guess
Well,
that's
that's how
what
we
I have to do.
typically are. That 2 years ago, we had 2,000 pieces of candy and we were finished by 7:30. And we would give out one, and we set up a table out on the sidewalk so that they don't have to come up to our doorway. But we live on Christmas Circle in Chula Vista, so people have decided that it's also Halloween Circle, and it's overwhelming. It's just overwhelming. But last night it wasn't bad. So
okay, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's just you're
Yeah.
right. It's kind of like Christmas Circle, except it's not ever. It's only these 3 or 4 houses, but I guess word's gotten out, or people post on Instagram or something, and it's just I've never seen 95% of these kids before.
yeah, no, they come in. Yeah, they come in from all over the place. Yeah. Anyway,
I lived in
That's
Manhattan
what-
Beach. A bus brought some kids in.
yeah.
Well, in addition to give away candies, some of the parents doesn't like the kids to have candy. So every year I will prepare a box of fortune cookie, and apparently some of the parents love kids to have that. So
Oh,
it's
that's fun.
Yeah.
Do you put little fortunes in them?
Yes, when you buy a fortune cookie, it has
Oh, okay. You get them already. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, how fun. Are we all back? here about, it looks like everybody's here. Okay, I'm going to talk to everyone about a very narrow field of art. Narrow in that it, covers certain things, but definitely within that, there's a very broad interpretation. So let me see if I can share my screen here and get started. Okay, can everybody see that? Anybody?
Oh, that's beautiful.
Okay. So, yeah, we're going to talk about Lacquer and Cloisonné. And these are, as you'll see, I mean, there's quite a variety of objects that fall under that category, but I'm trying to focus it on what relates to what we have in the museum. I do have some additional things to show you, but mostly it's things as relate to what we have. So let's start with a discussion of lacquer. So lacquer comes from a tree. This is the Latin name Rus verniciflua, but it's known as the lacquer tree. So you can see the guy up here in the corner, upper right corner there, he's gathering the sap from the tree. And you can see they cut these horizontal notches, and then as the sap drains out, they gather it. And after it's gathered, it gets filtered, heated, and the pigment is added. And I guess the question is, why would you use lacquer? What is important about the lacquer? And actually it's very preservative of other materials. It's resistant to water, to rot, and to insects. And it can last, it can hold its luster and last for many years. Often in Asian art, Asian lacquer is often colored with either red or black, though you do see other colors, but the red and the black are the most important. And the red comes from cinnabar, which is a mineral. You can see I've got this block of cinnabar there. It's actually related to mercury. I think there's mercury oxide in it. So it also is toxic. In addition to the tree being toxic, the cinnabar is toxic. But when it's all heated and mixed and cured, touching it is not toxic anymore. So that's good to know. It's typically painted on with a brush, and then it's cured in between coats. So for many artistic uses of lacquer, they require maybe 30 or more coats with 12 to 24 hours of curing in between for each coat. So you can see that manufacturing lacquerware can be very time intensive. It's an ancient art. You can see here, it dates back to probably at least 2,500 years. That upper left figure is a small kneeling ram. So it has a wood core, it's carved wood that has then been lacquered with black lacquer. Down below, we have this circular box. I'm not sure what the substrate is on that, if it's wood or metal, it could be either one. But then it's coated in lacquer, many layers of lacquer. And in that case, it looks to me like there's two colors, a brown, bronzish brown, and a red. In that case, they have incised, there's a layer of red below the brown layer, and then it has been incised so that you can see the red. Now, on the right, this is a piece of leather that has been lacquered, and it's been used as body armor. And I'm not sure really what size this is in real life, but you can see the lacquer combined with the leather would be very protective against certain weapons and so on. And again, this is from the 14th century. This tray is quite large. It's actually about 2 feet in diameter. And this dates from the Yuan dynasty, which if you think back, that is before the Ming dynasty. So here we have 14th century, so 1300s. Now this is interesting. You can see the detailed carving. If you look at the detail on the right, and if you notice, so this is, we have sky, water, and land. And if you look at the detail here, you can see how the artist has used a different texture for each element. And you can see the depth and detail of the carving. So this is many, many layers of lacquer, many coats of lacquer that is then carved. This is really fun. We see these children playing here. They're playing hide and go seek. You can see some of them have their eyes closed. But if you look over here, we have a child who's hiding inside this tree. And we have, it looks like a child, just the forehead peeking up, the child hiding behind the tree. So there's a little bit of humor here. But like the box that Richard showed us, remember it had the 3 parts. Again, we have the sky, the water, and the land. And we have the lily pads floating on the water in the pond. So let's move on. So you can see also, and then we have this repeated pattern and this scallop shape of this platter, which just adds interest. Again, here's a carved box. Again, this is reminiscent of the box that we have in the museum that Richard talked to us about. This is carved in a different way. It's actually treated a little bit differently in that it has 3 different colors. So it's got the red that you see on the surface, and then there's also a black layer and a green layer. And so the artist has to know how deep his layers are and has to plan this all out so that he's carved this so that you have the red dragon here, which is the main focus, but he's swimming in the waves, which are this green, has green with touches of brown and black. And then around the edge, of course, we have the brown and the green with the red highlights. So it's a very, I can't tell you how many layers of lacquer this is. There's no way for me to know that, but you can see it takes many, many, and knowing where you want your colors to be and how deeply you want to carve. So if you know your surface highlights are red and then your background is going to be green and brown, you have to know exactly, how deep those are. So this dragon is cavorting between heaven, which we can see some clouds, and then we see the water and we have land. So these are 3 rocks. And again, notice the red highlights and then the incised area of the green and brown or black down in there. And then we have this repeated pattern, which we so often see in the Chinese art. And then we have what appear to be more dragons around the edge, but again, it's a repeated pattern. And then the sides, here you can see the division between the lid and the bottom part of the box. And then you can see this pattern, again, red at the surface and then carved down into the black layer. So lacquer was also used for furniture. As you can imagine, with its preservative properties, this would be very important. And also because lacquer is considered a very expensive process, a very time-consuming process. As a wealthy person, you would want to show off that you had lacquer. And so these large pieces of furniture were definitely important to the middle and upper classes to demonstrate their wealth. So notice that the cabinet here on the left is covered with different colors of lacquer. Now, these are not carved in the same way that the box was. These colors of lacquer would have been painted onto the wood. And again, many, many layers. And we see, again, this practice of the repetitive pattern around the edge. And we have this bottom panel. It's very difficult to see what that is. But again, it's more of a decorative pattern. And then we have these two seams in the centers of the door. So these are a gathering of high-ranking officials. They're in a pavilion and a garden and a kind of in a mountain setting, and they're enjoying music and reading and painting. So it's kind of this ideal of retreating from the urban scene and into a reclusive life, or getting away back into nature. As we know, nature is a very important theme in East Asian art, and especially we'll see it even more so in when we get to Japan. This is all still China. And here we see a Ming Dynasty side table. And notice this has a mother of pearl inlay. So the inlay, the lacquer would be, once it's laid down and cured, it would then be carved out to the depth of the inlay, and the inlay would be laid in so that it would be a smooth surface. The inlay and the top surface of the lacquer are at the same height. And then there would probably be a clear coat of lacquer on top of the whole thing. But again, I can't really tell what the theme is here. It looks like a central maybe deity with attendants and people coming to see. But it's, again, it's an image, a meaningful image to decorate a piece of furniture. And look at these lovely legs with this vine. It looks like a flower and a vine climbing up the legs. Again, very labor intensive to do not only the lacquer, but this mother of pearl inlay. And we will see more mother of pearl as we go along, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So actually, this snuff bottle on the left is actually in real life is quite small, but I blew it up so you can see the detail here. So, so this has a Buddhist theme to it. We see the, oops, I lost my cursor here. Here we go. This flame jewel here, and then we see the lotus blossoms and other flowers around the sides here. Notice this little treatment of like roof shingles, and again this banding that goes around. And notice again this carving. Remember that large plate that we looked at. It's not, it makes that background more interesting. Really, it's almost like it's like a void, but rather than being flat, the artist has created this repetitive pattern to make it a little bit more interesting. And again, we see that it's red, but we do see a little shadow of the black down below in the depths in this pattern. So it's not red all the way through. And again, you can see how deeply carved this is. This is really quite high relief, especially for such a small object. And if you notice here we have a traditional vase shape like we have seen in porcelain, but this is lacquer. And evidently this particular work, it's lacquer on a metal base. And this is quite heavy. Often, they use wood as the basis for the lacquer, which makes the items less heavy. But notice the all over carving of this. Every surface, every part of the surface is covered with carving. And again, notice this, we have the horizontal banding down here, and then we have this scene that probably repeats as it goes around. Now, when we get to Japan, we see a different treatment of the lacquer. Notice the black and gold. So this writing table down here has designs of melons and squirrels, and which are auspicious symbols of fortune and fertility. And again, we see themes of nature in both of these objects, in the mirror box with the peonies and the feathers. This is probably a family crest. And then these are peonies around the edge. Now this is a saddle seat that sits on top of the horse, and then you sit on it. This is from that Miramachi period that Anne was talking to us about. This was done in 1491, but they do think it was re-lacquered. There's actually an inscription on it. That's why we know the actual date of 1491. But then it was re-lacquered. So this gold was a specialty of the Japanese lacquer artists. And we can look at our next work here. So on the left, we have a writing box. And if you look at this technique, we have several different textures here. We have this dusting almost of gold, and then we have this smooth gold here, and then these waves here that with these little peaks and some leaves. And this is actually silver. It has depth, and it's like it's been piled up and shaped and then inlaid into the lacquer. So this is real gold. It is done in a couple of different ways. So it can be painted on, which is more likely how this would have been put on, this solid gold. And then it can be sprinkled on when the top layer of lacquer is still wet before it's cured. And so you can get this sprinkling technique. And we see this quite often with the gold inlay and the gold sprinkling. So on the right, we have a sake ewer, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, with chrysanthemums, which are the imperial symbol. And then we have Paulownia on the right here, which is also an important symbol in Japan. It's a three-lobed flower, and it's also called the Royal Empress tree. So this could have been used by the imperial court. Though remember, at this time, the court doesn't have as much power as it would in the future. I love the graphics of this, the bold graphic of the gold against the black, and then this zigzag kind of lightning shape here between the gold background and the black. It's a very interesting graphic style. And again, these are considered extremely, extremely expensive and take quite a bit of time to produce. The writing box would be used to store writing implements, the pen, the inkstone, and so on. Not the pen, but the brush. So this is related to a work that we have in the museum, the one that Mickey is going to be talking to us about. It's the same artist, Shibata Zishin. So I'm not going to talk much about him because I'm going to let Mickey do that. But this is actually lacquer. It's a lacquer painting. It's painted on paper. And it's a number of different layers, again, of lacquer. But you can see the use of gold. And then we have the white and the black layer. And notice the red seal that he's put on it too, as we've seen in other areas, other types of painting. So he's also used, this surface is rough, so there's a bit of tactile texture to this. And so we have these 5 colors, he did a lot of painting in lacquer, and he was pretty limited by the colors of lacquer that were available at the time, which would have been black, brown, vermilion, which is a red, green, and yellow. And so that would determine really the palette of his paintings. But as you can see, he's used that to great advantage. And again, notice we've been seeing nature themes in all of the Japanese art with the flowers. Let's go back actually a little bit. Again, this landscape look, and again, the flowers, even though, you know, these are very graphic and stylized, but again, based on nature. Now, this is very interesting because it's unlike anything that we have really in our culture. So what we call in-row, which are these boxes that men wore tucked into their belt. And the boxes would hold just very small objects or medicines. They were mostly made to hold medicines. But you can see the layers. There's several different layers of boxes. And then they have a bottom and a top. And you can see the holes here. And I'll show you some in a minute, but just so you understand what's happening. So there is a thread that goes through, or a cord that goes through these holes that holds the whole thing together so it can hang like this. There's a bead that controls how tight these are held together. Obviously, if you pull up the bead, then that loosens it and you can pull the boxes apart. And then you have what is called a netsuke that is tucked up in the belt and hangs over so that it hangs onto the belt. So let's look at these. We have a lot of these actually. The ones I'm showing here are the ones that we have on display. I didn't assign any reports on these this time because they're very hard to tour. They're small and they're in a small case and so on, but they are very interesting. And at a certain point, well, they became popular during the Edo period, but then toward the late Meiji period, people were collecting them. The Japanese were collecting them themselves, as well as people abroad were collecting them. Because remember, this is the end of the Edo period into the Meiji period is when Japan opened up to the West, and there was a lot of back and forth trading. Now, notice these wonderful netsukes. These come in many different materials and shapes. They're often little figures like this. They can be beads. This is the bead, and I'm sorry, I can't remember what that's called. There is a Japanese name for that. I'm sorry, I can't remember. But that basically, if you slide it down, holds all these boxes, and you can barely see the lines here as how they're divided. So this process of the gold in the lacquer is called makie, and it can be silver or gold, but powdered gold or silver is added to the resin. Remember the lacquer, which when it's purified is clear, and then the color is added. So then you have this paintable gold lacquer that you can apply. And these boxes can be made of light wood, or some of them are even made of paper that when the lacquer is added then becomes thick and can hold its form. And again, we have a number of these that we have in the vaults. We also have a book that I'm going to return to the Docent library on Wednesday, but it's just full of these, and they come in all different shapes and styles. Some of them are ivory, especially the netsuke. The little netsuke can often be ivory, and the beads, and they can be carved. They're really interesting. So if we move on to Korea, we have, again, here's some furniture. I don't think we have, well, we have one object on display that you'll see in a moment that's Korean lacquerware. I couldn't find many examples at least in the museum's websites that I was looking at of much in the way of Korean lacquer, but it's I'm going to show you what I did find. And you can see the inlay. The Koreans used a great deal of this mother of pearl inlay. And again, they used it a lot for the furniture. And notice this overall, just overall decoration that we see. And again, this is the top of the table looking down with this geometric design around the edge. And then this overall decoration. These are flowers. They're like 3 heart-shaped petals around the center. And so that's what we're looking at, and along with the scalloped edge. Those flowers are typical of the Goryeo period. And let's look at some more here. These boxes, again, notice this all over inlay decoration. And we have a pattern that unifies it along here, these rondelles. And again, along the top edge of the box, we have a repeating pattern. And then we have this, it looks like foliage in the center. It's repeating pattern around the edge, and then these vines or foliage. Now, on the right here, this box is older. This dates from 1550 to 1650. Notice the pearl, notice the mother of pearl inlay, this very, very fine inlay here. This is very difficult to achieve. It is extremely thin. It has to be cut with a special saw very delicately. So it's not like a cord or a wire that you could wrap around. The scroll shape actually has to be cut out this way into that shape and then inlaid. And you can imagine how difficult it is to handle something that thin and to inlay it. And again, remember that the lacquer has to be cut out to hold the mother of pearl inlay. So it has to be trimmed out to the correct depth. And all of this is very thin. This mother of pearl, often it comes from abalone, the inside of the abalone shells, if you've ever seen something like that. Mostly these boxes would hold robes, like maybe your wedding costume or official robes. Because of the nature of the lacquer, it's insect resistant, so it's very protective of anything that the box would store. It also protects against humidity as well as the insects. The peony, we have the peonies on here. Again, like we see so often, they're considered a symbol of fortune and prosperity. We see them over and over again. Yeah, so let's see, nothing. Okay. That's about it for that. So again, so on the right, of course, this is our chest, and I'm not going to talk about it because I don't want to steal anyone's thunder. But we have one here on the left at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, which is the red lacquer. And again, this mother of pearl inlay and the brass hinges. Again, both of these have hinges. And you can see, again, this overall decoration. There's kind of 2 kinds of chests. There's a nong and a jang. This is a nong, which is made of stackable, it's actually 3 pieces, 1 piece, 2 pieces, and then the stand that it's sitting on. And I will let the person who does their report on it tell you why it comes in those different pieces. So you'll just have to wait on that. And a jang cabinet would be a single piece cabinet. So these were usually in the women's quarters, and they would hold clothes and so on. And I think the theme on here is scholars, basically scholars and hermits, and basically their reclusive nature and pulling back from society to study and meditate and so on. And again, remember that this lacquer furniture is also a statement of the family's wealth. So we're going to move on from lacquer and talk about cloisonné. So Cloisonné, you can see what it is here. So this is, cloisonné is when you take wires of, they can be copper, typically they're copper, and attach them to another base, usually another copper base. And within these outlines, you place enamel, and then the object is fired. So the enamel is basically a glass paste. It's ground glass made into a paste. And every time you fill the wire, the vessel is fired in a kiln, and then the enamel shrinks, and then you have to add more enamel. It's fired again, and this takes a number of times, 4 to 6 different times, different firings. And then at the end, it is all polished with stone, starting with a rougher stone, and then becoming finer and finer and finer. So and then the cloisons, each of these spaces is called a cloison, which is a French term meaning partition. And that becomes part of the design. So here we have a cabinet with some of the implements that you would use. This would be used to form the top of these vases. We can see here each of these is in a different stage of completion, and we'll look at that. We'll have a better detail of that in a moment. And then it looks like vials of the different colors of enamel, some tools for working the wire, and so on. And here we have, and this is going to be a Japanese cloisonné vase, and you'll see why in a few minutes. But you can see the artisan attaching the wire to the base. And here we have someone who is actually working with the enamel. You can see different colors of enamel here. This is a very small, you often find these very small cloisonné objects. So that person's not working on a base, they're working on a smaller cabinet. I'm sorry, you can hear my dog moaning in the background. Can't really do anything with her right at the moment. Here is the different stages. Here are the different stages. So here we have the drawing has been put onto the copper vessel. And here we have, they've added the copper wire, and the whole thing has been treated with a thin layer of enamel and fired as a base. And then you can see as the different colors are being applied. So here is an early layer of enamel. You can still see quite a depth of the wire, and you can see more and more has been placed. And here it is when it's all of the enamel has been placed before it has been polished. And here we see it after it has been polished. And you can see here, the cloisons are visible. Now, often at this point, the cloisons, the surface that you see after the polishing would then be either gold or silver plated at that point. So cloisonné actually dates back, a couple thousand years at least, 3,000 look by the judge of this. This is actually from ancient Egypt. In this case, it's not enamel. These are actually semi-precious stones that have been put into the wire to hold that. And actually, there's a Celtic tradition of cloisonné also, and I didn't include all of that, but and here this is the same object. You can see that this is the detail of this part of this necklace, and with the semi-precious stone around. So cloisonné, actually, the process of cloisonné didn't reach China until about the 14th century. There really isn't much dating from that time. So most of the earliest works date from the 15th century. So here we have a 15th century Ming Dynasty cloisonné platter. And you'll notice some things that you'll see over and over again in the Chinese cloisonné, which is this turquoise, the use of this turquoise color as a background. And then these traditional colors, we have red, yellow, cobalt, and green, and some white. And you'll see these colors over and over again. I have a detail, here we go. And you can see even here, some of the colors, you have several colors used within one cloison. So you have, it gives a little bit of interest and depth to the work as you move around. You're white, and we have some other colors. Some of this, the copper over time can start to appear through the cloisonné. So sometimes you see this kind of pockmarked pattern, but that's all that is. But again, so this dates from the 1400s. So what is that? Over 600 years old. So this dates from about the same time. This is actually a Buddhist altar vase. So it would be placed either maybe with holy herbs or feathers or perhaps flowers on a Buddhist altar in Tibet. And notice the attention to detail we have here. Look at this, little teeny tiny area. This is looking straight down. So this is at this top of this lip here. And again, around the edge here. And notice what we have here. We have a traditional shape, right, that we've seen in the porcelain and the ceramics. And we have some other similar features. We have this horizontal banding that we've seen in the porcelain. And then we have this large central area. So we have these lotus scrolls here and the lotus flowers. And then this flame-like symbol that we often see in the Tibetan Buddhist works. And again, notice that we have the turquoise background. So here we are later in the Ming Dynasty, up in the 17th century. And you can see they're still using these fairly traditional shapes, right? We've seen the ding all the way back to the bronze tomb objects. But here we are in about 1600 in the Ming Dynasty, and they're using this familiar shape. And we can see the decoration here. We still have some of this horizontal banding, the feathers, some banding here and here, and then down at the bottom. But then we have this picture or scene here in the center area, and we have it looks like a crane, and again more flowers, and again very, very stylized, and yet we still have this turquoise background. And again here, this is ours at SDMA, and we have these scroll shapes more stylized in this particular work. But again, we have the horizontal banding here and here. And then we have the turquoise background again. And with highlights of, I'm not sure if this is gold or bronze. Now you can see here that they do continue to use these traditional shapes. We have the Ru Yi, which is the scepter. And I apologize, I couldn't find a color photo of this. So this is a black and white photo, but I wanted to show you that, again, we see these over and over and over again in the Chinese art, but in different materials and different styles. So again, here's kind of a lotus shape. And again, this repetitive pattern and so on. Now here we have one, a vase in the traditional shape, but it's a little different, isn't it? The turquoise is used as the background down below, but there's this white that is used in the background here. So it's not it's mostly turquoise that you see as the background, but occasionally you do see other colors. And you can see that the colors are slightly different here. I think, I think that's the artist's use of, again, of using different colors together in the same cloison, not necessarily from mixing, but you can see an effort to give a little more dimensionality to it. And notice this nice lobed shape to the vase. You can see it, this indentation here. Again, another ding. We've seen this many times, and in this shape. And again, we have the turquoise background. Now this is later, we're getting into the 18th century, and we see some additions of the gold scroll work added to the outside of the cloisonné object. Now these again are very expensive, very time consuming, and so on. So again, these are reserved for the upper classes, in the imperial class and the scholar class. Now here are some other just interesting objects. Of course, we have our recumbent bull that Becky told us about. And I love this rooster incense burner. Look at these feathers, all individually done, and all of the colors here in the feathers. So this piece here lifts off, and you burn the incense inside, and then here are these little holes here to let out the smoke so that you can smell the incense. These are very unusual, and I apologize. In photoshopping in the black background, somehow I don't know, I lost my edge here, but so these are actually Old Testament prophets dating back from the 18th century. So we have Moses here. He's holding the 10 Commandments, and you can see he's got the horns that he always has. And we have David with his harp. And then we have these wonderful cloisonné robes. And look at these. These are only about 4 inches tall, I believe. And so we have this incredibly fine cloisonné work in here. And you can even see, they've put in the characters so that you could read this. If I could read this, I can't read this. But just interesting that you can find so many different aspects of it. Again, a traditional vase with the turquoise background. And I think you can see that the work is becoming finer and finer. The size of the cloisons is becoming smaller and smaller. And then again, we see these traditional rondelles, the flowers here. And again, this addition of the gold and bronze or brass to the outside, dragons. And this is a traditional Chinese musical instrument. And the detail, if I have a detail of this, yes, here you go. So you can see the bright colors in this, and again, but still that turquoise background, and then the bright addition, these bright, small, tiny little cloisons. So what's going on here? This is completely different. Does this even really look like the cloisonné we've been looking at? No, this is actually further down the line where we end up with in Japan. We'll back up a little bit, but Japan, remember Japan is closed for a few hundred years during the Edo period, and then opens up in the mid-19th century to the West. And at the time, in the early 19th century, the Japanese start to be interested in the Chinese cloisonné. But what they do, they kind of have to figure out how to make it themselves. So they reverse engineer it and take it apart and see how it's made. And then later in the 19th century, when Japan has then opened up, they start to want to market. There isn't a large enough market inside of Japan for the cloisonné, so they want to sell it abroad. So they need to start appealing to Western tastes, and they start developing new techniques. So they bring in this guy named von Wagener, Gottfried von Wagener, who is a German chemist, and he comes to Japan and he helps them to develop glass that with different colors. So suddenly they have this wide array of colors, and they start dealing with transparent glazes. And so over time, actually in a relatively short period of time, the Japanese cloisonné develops in a very different direction. And so we see the new colors, the glazes, they develop a wireless technique. And I think you can see from these two vases, we have open space, we have asymmetry, we have a little bit of repetition of patterns, but that does not involve the entire vase. And we have a painterly approach. Shippo is the Japanese term for cloisonné. And let's look at how they got there. So this is in the mid 19th century, and here we see the development of what's called goldstone. Can you see the sparkles in this? So here, first of all, the colors are very different, aren't they, than what we've been seeing in the Chinese cloisonné. Suddenly we have these golds and browns and different blues and this kind of gold brown color, almost beige. And then we see this wonderful sparkle in here and in here. These are minerals that are added onto the vessel, and then it's coated in the clear enamel. So that, I'm sorry, yes, clear enamel that that then holds that and adds to the sparkle. So this is ours, and again, I'm not going to talk about it because somebody else is going to talk about it. But I did want to show you the goldstone at the this shoulder of this vase. So here we have, and there are a few famous cloisonné makers and factories in Japan. This is one of them, Namakawa Yasuyuki. And he worked extensively with von Wagner and to develop this black enamel. It's a transparent black enamel. And you can see the large field of color. Again, nature, we see the birds and the flowers. Here's a detail. Very painterly, a completely different style than the Chinese style. And again, but we do see the repetitive pattern, kind of the register up here at the top. But really the entire vase is about this nature. Remember Taoism and remember we have the idea of it's not perfect and refined. I mean, this is very refined, I would say, but the nature itself flows according to its own nature or characteristics, as you will. It doesn't adhere to a pattern. Again, here we have more. This is the artist standing here, Namakawa Yasuyuki, in his studio. And here's another one of his, actually, this is a pair of vases that are identical, and you can see the front and the back. Now, many of these are very small. This one, I believe, is only about 6 inches tall. You can see here how small they are in comparison to the person here. And there are some larger ones, but that just shows you how small and how fine these cloisons are. Again, here's a very beautiful one, vase with flowering cherry and birds. This is from the Ando Cloisonné Company, just outside of Tokyo in Nagoya. Actually, I don't know if it's just outside of Tokyo, but it's down in that area. Again, with this transparent black glaze. The Ando Cloisonné Company is still in existence. And the Ando Juzeimon who is one of the founders of the original family. He traveled to Europe and went to the World's Columbian Exposition to study the market, and he hired artisans in Japan. His most important artisan was Kawada Shibutaro, and in 1918, around the time this was made, he had probably 50 artisans working at the factory making this. Here's a detail of this space again, with the flowers and the birds. And this open space is like a rest. It allows the mind to rest. You know, you have this busy, highly designed area, and then you have this empty area. So the two work off of each other. And they even developed something called wireless cloisonné. So how would you make wireless cloisonné? Well, what you do, there's a couple different ways to do it, but the way that's mostly done is all the wires are laid down and the enamel is laid down, but then as you reach the final layer, the wire is removed. So the wire isn't soldered onto the vessel as it was in the past. They developed a glue that it could easily be removed. And so then the layers would still hold their shape because they're, you know, they cure, the glass cures and it still holds its shape, but it then blends together at the edges to create these soft edges. So again, you know, here we have a traditional shape again, but it's a completely new take on it. So again, we have an incense burner. We have it looks like a brass or bronze lid here with openings to allow the smoke to come through. And yet we have these lovely fish swimming around the outside. And notice the colors. I mean, this is completely different than what we've seen in the Chinese cloisonné. And this tray over here, this is very similar to something we see on an object in our collection. And again, it's wireless. So it helps to achieve this painterly approach to the cloisonné. And this Namakawa Sozuke is another prominent cloisonné artist. And most of this is during the Meiji period, again, in the late 19th, very early 20th century. Again, here's a pair of identical vases, front and back. Notice the mist that they were able to create with this wireless cloisonné. And here's another, this is a combination of wireless and wired cloisonné. Again, two identical vases. So we have wisteria here, the wisteria and a bird and a branch and so on. This is, let's see, it tells me it's 36 centimeters tall. So what is that? That's about, it's less than 18, maybe 15, somewhere between 12 and 15 inches probably. So again, that's a little bigger than some of them we've been looking at. But. And another innovation is Jinbari. Now, we don't have any of this in our collection that I know of, at least that's on display, but I wanted to show this to you. So instead, well, so there might be something to build up a pattern on the vessel, but then there's a foil, a silver foil here that is added, and that can be textured to create this stipple pattern. And you can see here that this leaf pattern, actually, I think it's wisteria maybe again, is there's something below the foil that's causing it to hold its shape there. And then this transparent red glaze has been put over it. So akasuke means blood colored red. So that's the name of that glaze that's on it. And you can see the detail here. And this is more Jinbari ware, and you can see the combination of the Jinbari. You can see the texture under here and in here. And then you can see the addition of the more traditional Cloisonné, again, more wisteria blossoms. And here again, so here you have the foil Jinbari technique and the traditional Cloisonné, but again, with these beautiful colors and patterning. So that's all I have for pretty pictures. This is just for you, for your own information to look back on the different terms for different styles of Cloisonné, and just a little graphic here showing you the different kinds. You have to go back to the previous slide to see which one is which. But here, here, Mouzin Chipot is the wireless here, that technique there. So, so that's it. Well, let me stop share here so I can see you. So anybody have questions or comments or?
Michelle, I put up a note. The beads are called ojime.
Oh, ojime, yes, on the inrow, and netskis, that little bead is the ojime. Thank you, Jim. I couldn't remember the name. Any
Questions, comments, anybody?
Okay.
You stunned them with your excellence.
Well, you'll be getting, I forget who, is it Diana? Are you the one doing the vases? Okay, so you'll hear more about the Cloisonné. I didn't want to, get too much in the way. And then somebody is talking about the Korean wedding chest, I believe. Is that Sandra? Okay, good. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's it for today. And on Wednesday, we have reports, right? And discussion of themes and a compare contrast exercise. So looking forward to that. Oh, and just so you all know, so next week, I am not going to be here. I finally get to go visit my sister after all of this craziness. But I will check in with you on Monday on Zoom. But I won't be there next Wednesday to hear those reports. But Jim and Pam will be there, and they will be excellent and fill you all in on that. So, okay, but I will see. Yes.
So the reports tomorrow are mostly a 2A group.
That's
correct?
right. Yeah, you're
And
not
we're
until
going to
next
talk about
week.
themes. We don't have to have anything exactly ready, right?
Well, it would be nice if you email me the night before, but it's only just a few words or a sentence about what your theme is, and then we'll talk about them. Or if you're divided, if you can't decide between two themes, if you want to discuss that too, that's fine. But I'm hoping at this point that you've all at least run this by your mentors, at least your theme, and have some idea of what you want to do. So
Thank you.
any other questions, comments? Okay. We'll see you all Wednesday then.